So we're gonna talk about the future. So my first question is how did we get here? And this was actually what Lauren and I were discussing this morning downstairs, and made up a big chunk of Julia Liu's presentation. And I think one of the most interesting things about predicting the future is that we're all carrying sort of bits of our past with us, and we see different things. And you know, my path here is different from Ash's, is different from Kate's, is different from JT's, and that's all the introduction they're getting, by the way. and you know, we take this with us and we see different things. And part of what is important is the diversity of viewpoints that we bring with us. And with that said, how did I get here? And I came from theater and lighting. And I ended up in video. And I brought a lighting person's background into video, and then changed video to meet my needs as a lighting person. And that was how I sort of created my own future. And the jobs that I went into, like people ask me what I do. I work for Fuse Technology Group and I do some consulting, but people ask me what my job title is. And I have no idea. I mean, I genuinely don't have one. And I think that's fairly typical of a lot of people. We've sort of inhabited this space that we create. So I'm gonna at least give each of these three people a moment to talk, and then I'm gonna ask them a question. So we start with JT.
About our past and how we got here, perhaps?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, my path is, you know, this is an interesting panel because we have a quite varied backgrounds and also different, you know, career lengths and stuff like that. I consider myself quite lucky because I'm new to the game here a bit. But my path actually started at a symphony. I was working at an orchestra, a symphony in Miami that was designed to be a place to help save classical music called the New World Symphony. So this beautiful Frank Gehry building that has projection mapping and automated stages and cameras and all sorts of stuff to try to help make it relevant and interesting. So it turned into this amazing sort of playground of having to or getting to calibrate 30 projectors in an afternoon sort of a thing. And that really just led into a whole world of visual content especially. So went straight from there into pop music and lots of pop music visuals, and now ending up in the crazy world of virtual production and XR. But my path is taking a lot of that with me, but it also comes from taking the experience from people like yourselves that I've met over the years and other people in this room, changing that a little bit and kind of going to the next place with it maybe.
Cool. Okay.
Hello, yeah. My background is graphic design, so I started as a graphic designer. So I sort of fundamentally see it as moving graphics, what I do. Or motion graphics, some people like to call it. And, you know, I sort of started off that, moved into sort of moving image, and through having done a music video for Elton John's re-release of Are You Ready for Love, David LaChapelle, American photographer, saw it and wanted that same look and vibe for the show that he was art directing and opening in Las Vegas. And that was in 2004, and that was the sort of first big screen scale, sort of seeing the design and graphic design at scale, and truly fell in love with it. So I've been a graphic designer for a very long time, but actually quite reasonably new to the whole sort of what we now do a lot of, which is projection mapping. And I was suddenly sitting here thinking, while you were talking, that I realised our sort of first big building projection or big building projection project was back in 2017. And we won the pitch out of a group of other people, having put the ideas in. And in my huge excitement of having won this pitch, realised that we'd never done any building projection before, and I'd got totally overexcited and was like, shit, now we have to do it. But again, you know, it was one of those things that when you find something that you truly love, it was, you know, it's not just projection, it's working with projections and design. So I think that's where we are today, and that's a quick précis of how we got here.
Cool. Ash?
Well, I started as a software engineer in the games industry for the company that made Lara Croft. Except I wasn't actually working on Lara Croft. We worked on a vastly inferior game that sank without trace on release. And I then got fired because I was crap, and it just wasn't working really. And started my own company doing virtual go-go dancing robots at raves. Which is, if you were there, was a completely logical thing to do, and got fed up of not making any money and hooked up with some people who were doing a show for Massive Attack, and ended up writing a piece of software in about 3 months to do the show with them, and then got asked to join UVA, which then turned into making a new piece of software every time we did a show, because that's what I like. I like making software. And then around 2005, we got the call from U2 to make a show for them, which required that we write a 3D real-time visualizer in 2 days for various reasons. Not getting fired, basically. And motivator. Yeah, so I mean, it all sort of just kind of, it's a bit like Breaking Bad. You make one decision at the beginning, and then you're forced down this path. So that sort of created D3 and sort of turned into Disguise. And I quit / kicked myself upstairs about 2 years ago, year and a half ago, and now I'm not exactly sure what I'm doing. We're figuring it out.
Welcome to the club. So I asked the three of you to basically come up with a job that does not exist. And this is the truism of our industry is basically, I said, like, I don't have a job title. I never appear on an RFP. Nobody has ever sent in a document that says, like, one Matt Ward. It just, they want solutions. And I'm good at orthogonally coming at these things. But our industry revolves around getting job titles on RFPs so a client can budget for something so that you can actually do the work. I mean, it goes back to the conversation about workflow and the different roles. And if you don't have somebody in a position where that focus and that combination of skills is required, then it's more stressful, you're more likely to fail. We tend to mature into giving positions names and, evolving from there. So, who's going to go first? Let's go.
Keep on going left to right each time. Just
No, we
bounce
could.
around.
Ash will go first.
I haven't thought about this at all.
Okay.
I will admit. But
Ash
I
will go
think
last.
I think the job that I've ended up doing now is, it's sort of. I remember at the start of the U2 show, they got a priest in, and he sort of blessed the whole tour, and in particular, he stopped and he blessed the computers, which I thought was really sweet. So that's basically what I do now, is I bless the computers. So I'm sort of like a combination of a shrink who doesn't say anything, but I sort of bestow benefaction on technical efforts. Encouragement, I guess.
I like that idea. I like the blessing. I had two. That's a classic move on my part. I'm not sure which one.
It's a backup.
Yeah, there was a backup. They were both rubbish, I thought, but it might be a backup. I thought I came up with a personal content shopper. I quite liked the idea of sort of really personalising down and getting someone to advise on your content. And I think the other one, because I'm just going to go into, was a digital emotion assessor. And I thought that in this sort of day and age, as we're sort of shifting realities and everything, is that we've got actual a duty of care of making sure that we protect people. So I figured that could be a job.
That makes sense. Yeah. It depends on the situation as well, right? Like digital content for your own personal needs at home in your own TikTok Black Mirror bubble, or if that's part of the show that you're experiencing as well.
I started thinking about bubbles, how we could exist in bubbles, and those bubbles then connected to create another experience, and then the more that joined, different experience would change. So anyway, I went down the right wormhole there.
Makes sense. I mean, I was trying to land on the right term. There's something dystopian and maybe Blade Runner-esque about it, but some sort of breeder is the idea, but like AI breeding, like, or like a horticultural, I can't remember the right word for it, but you're farmer. Like when you do a thing now, you have someone who's making a workflow and a pipeline and stuff like that. Well, now with all this stuff going on behind us, whether it's the AI side of things or whatever, like I need to grow these 10 different types of tools for this project that we need. I need to build these pipelines, but you're no longer going to be saying I need After Effects and this and this. It's like I need to design something that happens, but you're not going to be coding it quite in the same way. So how do you curate this, and how do you like build something from the ground up? And I don't know.
So it's like a
tool
tool
farmer.
A tool prompter.
Yeah,
You need
maybe.
somebody who writes prompts.
Well, and
for
that, yeah,
tools.
whoever said yesterday about like the person whose resume said, prompt, writer or whatever,
Yeah.
and there was another great term about like a historian and a curator. Like there is something to, jokes aside, to be said about like who is going to gather all of the semi-sentient things that are helping us, in whatever time frame that will be. I would like to think that there's still some human, help with that, perhaps, or maybe it's the other way around. I'm not sure.
Yeah. So we as an industry, where we've moved from this period of time where guitar amps, analog guitar amps, tube amps had 20% tolerances in components. So you would basically like turn on a guitar amp, and if you were a rock star, you would then go turn on 99 other guitar amps, and you would pick which one was like magical, because the component tolerances were such that it really made a difference. Now our component tolerances are microscopic, and pretty much everything is, even our networking is computers. It's just embedded Linux, or as Michael Kohler was lecturing me just the other day. And so you get to this point where I mean, the equipment still matters, and bending the equipment to your will matters, but so much more is pushed back on designers, on creatives, on people who understand how to organize these tools. And I think that's kind of a central part of our question in terms of where we're going. When all of this is in the cloud or AI or whatever, I mean, what are you going to bring to a project that is going to win you the job? It's still going to be ideas. It's still going to be an ability to curate the emotions, and so I think that's the end of our talk, actually. But I mean, what's your impression of sort of how that shift in technology has changed your professional focuses?
I mean, there's a little bit of like, some of this is a bit collective grown in the audience, like metaversy is like something that we're all dealing with in every day-to-day conversations. Like people who are pitching projects right now, or people who are working in the space, have to discuss what this means for, even worse, like phygital. I don't know if you heard that, like physical and digital combined, just gross. But like, how are you working with all these different spaces now? Is something we have to kind of think about. Yeah, or yeah,
I mean, that's what we need. Is we need somebody for our industry who manages these new words.
the words.
Because
Keeper of the
some of them
books.
are just awful.
But it is a real thing, like you were talking about with Bubbles, is like we are trying to create these individualized experiences and have these personalized connections. But like what the first talk yesterday was talking a lot is like, going to an event gives you this shared experience that feels personal. So there's a concern for me about the more we try to personalize things. Yeah. I don't know if anyone's actually done those Fortnite concerts, but sometimes you're sitting there playing a game by yourself. It is an interesting experience, but it does not replace being in a room with 100,000 people with lights and stuff like that. So how do we do something that is actually interesting and engaging, or should we, is the question. Like, if you're in a bubble and you choose your color on your environment, and you choose your music, and you choose what you're looking at, is that really a designed performance experience at that point, or are you just choosing your screensaver,
Can I just point out that I thought it's a terrible idea, the bubbles. I think it is all about the sort of the audience very much. I mean, what Luke was saying is that there's that sort of connection that we don't want to lose. I don't think it's about that sort of that creating that emotion and that connection between the audience and what's happening on stage. So no, the bubbles are terrible idea.
But so it's not a point at you, but a point on what's been asked from us all as designers in the last 2 years in the virtual side. In the future, that's asked more as well, potentially, and how do we deal with that is kind of an interesting one, I think.
So what's a particular, and this came up as we were just sitting on stage, but it's such an interesting topic. What's a new technology that's just ubiquitous today that you completely dismissed? And this is interesting. I when I go to trade shows, try and find the thing that I am completely dismissive of and go find it, because so many of those assumptions are just wrong, and so you have to sort of face the thing that you think is beneath you, or whatever. And we were talking about Bluetooth and Bluetooth headsets, but
mine was the internet.
The internet.
Yeah. I mean, it sounded like a really good idea at the beginning, but I was never completely sure about it, and I think I've been proven right.
Is there something you guys have been particularly you found yourself completely wrong about?
No, I think he's. I think the same as you. I was sort of like, I thought the internet was a rubbish idea. So it's a really interesting one. I hadn't thought about that. No, I think the only sort of thing I could think of is what we were talking about yesterday, which was but it's slightly different, is the advent of the sort of, like we were saying about the iPhone, and the fact it's still called an iPhone, yet the ability for it to be a phone has been, questionable from day one, really, as to whether it. Anything that allows you to turn it to mute with your ear is questionable. That I would say perhaps. Yeah. You?
You were talking about conferences. I was at IBC in Amsterdam a couple weeks ago, and I didn't really check my watch and realized I'd spent like over an hour at the button manufacturer stall. Like, this guy had a bunch of buttons on panels, and like, you buy a red one or a green one, and this one clicks, and this one, and I was like, oh, this is so exciting. Probably should have been looking at new technology, but it was the first time we had talked about something tactile in a really long time. And in our space in LA at Extra Studios, Scott Miller, the CTO, and I spend a lot of time talking about, like, how do we get the fancy tech out of people's vision and just give them a big red button that says, like, go, or whatever. And I think that's something that we forget quite a lot, is like, whether from the design experience, the audience experience, or client or whoever, like, what are people touching and feeling is something that's really interesting for me, that I think we've lost quite a bit of, and I'm curious in the future if some of that can come back in some way. When people do VR right now and wearables, everyone is getting handheld controllers, and that's great, but you're missing a little bit of tactile feedback. And omnidirectional treadmills are cool, and haptic suits are a thing potentially, but you can't hold something still. And so I think for me, like, that's going to be a big breakthrough. Just kind of jumping questions a bit, but like, when we get into the next sort of phase of a lot of this, what makes it tangible is if it feels real. And humans are really good at knowing very, very quickly, of knowing what's real and not. Working in augmented reality is brutal, because if it's yes or no, like, is it believable or not, And so it's the same thing with that sort of next step with a lot of this. Like, these creations are great, but somewhere in your soul, that it's not real.
I've had this weird sensation recently when I'm walking through the city that everything around me is produced by Stable Diffusion. it's I don't know, because I've been looking at so much of it, it's sort of seared itself into my eyeballs a little bit. And there's this weird, slightly unreal vibe around things at the moment. I don't quite know why.
Unreal world.
Yeah.
Yeah, the interesting thing about Stable Diffusion and GANs in general is this has been sort of publicly facing since, 2014, 2015? At some level. There's been a lot of popular research out there, and yet in the last 6 months,
It's gone crazy.
it's just been on fire. And what it feels like, so you look at the iPhone, all the technologies had been around for years. Phones, smartphones. You look at VR development, like, people were like in the 60s. It's going to be like the next thing. There's the picture of the guy wearing the dual CRTs on his face, which you can imagine would be very healthy.
Is he okay? I was going to say,
No.
like, how's Ed Catmull doing? Like, anyone who's touching
He's
all that
not
stuff.
okay.
But there was a point in the past when a lot of this stuff we would be exposed to it because elements of it would be in the media. And does it seem like now, as we shift from some of these hardware things to more and more being in software, that we're going to be exposed to these things later and later, and therefore have less time to adapt to them?
The time factor is a huge one. I mean, Luke's talk is something that I was trying to formulate that question as well, and it came up in after conversations, last night with a lot of people. Is like real-time design versus real-time rendering is a big sort of soapbox I stand on. Like, I think you should take a second to think about what you're doing, even though it can be rendered in real time. With something like this and other things like that, time is an interesting factor that kind of goes away with speed. And even the 6 months that we've seen, the AI tools growing, is that you don't have time to even plan what you're doing next, because you make a plan and then the tools have changed. And I'm curious to see what that will do in our disciplines and in our world, is that if you remove that factor of time, what is the experience going to be like, and what is the changeability going to be like? Because it's like people joke about like no new movies being made. It's all like recycled old titles and stuff like that. And part of it's because there's a demand to make a blockbuster every 2 months or whatever it is. And so I'm just curious if time has a big factor in some of that stuff.
Yeah, we were talking about this as well, as about that sort of, I know I keep banging on about it, but that sort of, that element of craft. And again, I think, Luke touched on it, and that sort of just having time to just sort of, to stop and make something, very, very beautiful and considered. I think that's the thing. And I think as things speed up, it just sort of gets, starts running away out of control. And I think we said sort of, will that element of craft change? I mean, can it still exist?
I mean, the sort of the current interest in things like Stable Diffusion reminds me a bit of when style transfer first came out.
Yeah.
It was like, oh my god, this is amazing, and then it was actually, it's really boring, and it just literally it went from amazing to boring in like a day, and I think there's something I'm detecting in these where it is all cliche. It's literally just extrapolating from everything it's seen. And so I think that we will learn very quickly to recognize. Oh, that's the.
It's the fire alarm.
Okay.
It's early.
May I have your attention,
Sounds more like a
please?
doorbell.
What is it?
We were promised
It's the
4:30,
AI. We've been rumbled.
just to be
The
clear.
public address and fire alarm systems are about to be tested.
We actually knew this was going to happen.
Follow
you
the
know? Yeah.
fire evacuation signal. Please take no further action.
Yeah, we'll run out.
They warned us about the fire alarm, but not the pre-announcement of the fire alarm test. So,
It's so polite.
come
The
in.
test is now complete.
Yes, that is very polite.
Difficulty in clearly hearing messages or fire alarm signals, please advise main reception. Thank you for your cooperation.
We're going to do another.
Self-destruct in T-10.
We're going to do another panel about that.
Wait, that message.
Wow. Excellent. I completely forgot what I was talking about.
Yeah, literally.
What was I talking about?
That was far more entertaining than what we're talking about.
I'm sorry, about how it's sort of basically a bit cliched, and the look of it is there's a certain look, and I think we'll learn to recognize that look and immediately go, oh, it's just AI. Whereas when you see something that's really new and creative and fresh and done by a human, you'll be able to tell. We'll get used to it. We'll educate pretty quick.
But I think it's also like the particular flavor we're seeing right now is Stable Diffusion, and this sort
It's,
of.
oh my god, we can do this.
But yeah, it's like what we can do, and like Rafik Anadol is doing really beautiful stuff with this, and like other people are learning how to, Pinar, like she was talking yesterday, has big plans for all of this. But I think it's just one part of it. I think the interesting thing for me and what a lot of people we've been talking with is that you're always so cocky as a human, like you just think you know what's going to happen and what's going to work. And I remember us all sitting at the lunch table at work 4 weeks ago, after image, the part of the mid-journey growth, everyone doing text to image, fine. We're like, well, this is really interesting, but it'll be way better when there's text to video, but that's like 6 months out or something like that.
And it
And
happened
then
like
the next day, it was
Yeah.
Google and Meta and everyone, and then it's
Yeah,
like,
I mean,
oh,
actually,
and then,
I got this one here, which is quite interesting.
yeah, and then 3D. The day
Like
after.
this is going to be so huge because you could just go, give me a. And
Oh,
there it
and
is.
Nerf plus that, where you
Oh,
can
yeah.
send somebody out and take 4 pictures, and suddenly have a functional 3D model of something.
Yeah, so I mean, this stuff is going to be everywhere, I think. It's basically view-independent photographs or films that you can grab with a couple of cameras. This is literally like a year from being everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think that's
I'm gonna
more
go
for
somewhere
me,
else.
like from when we talk about all these,
Back to that.
It's
more low-key.
calmer.
like the scary parts of these things is like, yeah, style-wise, I agree. Like, I don't think I think it's going to come and go, but what it does is it plants a seed, and now it's just part of Photoshop, and now it's just part of Unreal, and now it's just part of this, and now it's just another tool. Which
What's
jumps us
interesting,
ahead.
and Shelley used this in her panel at the end of yesterday, was these things where you can import your own data set. So you can import pictures of yourself or, other people, just to be, whatever. And it will give you outputs with those people, but it's still trained on a larger data set. There's people out there, Mario Klingemann, Helena Sarin, who are doing, who are creating their own data set. So it's a limited data set. They have curated the inputs and created their own system. And I'm wondering if for what we do, if we start to see more tools like that, where we're able to control the inputs. And if you control the inputs, of course, you have a tremendous amount of say over the output. You're not getting random Van Gogh references because it's not in the training set. And so if we see tools like that that allow us to combine things like NERF with an aesthetic, a style guide that we've created, or even our own art, that we can then use to basically transform that NERF model into something we can actually use in a show.
I mean, yeah, Chris from TEM were here yesterday for a brief moment at the end of the day. They did some really interesting work during COVID where, I apologize, I can't remember which Chris it was that did it, but during COVID they were researching AI models like this, and they were feeding all of their own stage reference material. So here's a bunch of inspiration of stage references when I'm designing a show. And what came out of it was like, oh yeah, I would design that show. Like, this is me or whatever on a paper. And it was really, really good. And so again, like using it as tools like that will be how it starts to kind of leverage. And I remember when Matt and the Notch team were starting to do face tracking using NVIDIA's tool, it was based off of a library of human faces. So here's, however many thousand pictures of human faces. And we were on tour, and like, what if it was thousands of pictures of Beyonce's face? Is it just going to go, do this? And it does.
Yeah.
So it's pretty, these tools have existed, and they're starting to grow, but it's just about how you leverage them and how you use them, I think.
But it also creates the opportunity for, let's say, Luke, who is advocating a slower, more deliberative process. Somebody could essentially just feed all of Luke's extensive back catalog and create Fast Luke Hall. It's the app that'll spit out a Luke Hall show.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, what happens the point is that, these techniques could indeed be applied, make me a show in the style of X, and then you start there and you go, well, make that a bit brighter and make that pink. Yeah.
It's you and I were talking this last night, like After Effects tried this thing. Luke is the After Effects expert. I can't remember what version back, but they did something where they gave you recommendations. So you'd say, here's a plugin, and they would give you 30 recommendations of what it might do. And I don't know anyone who's ever used that tool, because everyone who used it was like, I don't like this. But it's exactly what we're talking about here. It's just so interesting that people didn't dive into that, because like on paper, it was there. It was a really good idea. So I'm just curious as to how that goes into play.
I mean, I read about this tool which does kind of prompt engineering at scale. So it gives you like 1,000 images from different points in the space, and then you go, I like these ones, and then you hone in that way. I mean, it's sort of, it's maybe like a tool for communication with a client. So the way that you use mood boards is just mood boards on steroids. But then I think that, I don't think that show makers are going to be happy with just making another show that looks like what everybody else is making. There's always been this desire to stand out in some way. And so I think that there has to be like room for the human in there somewhere.
Yeah.
Or it's like, right before we were just talking about exactly that, like with time.
Yeah.
Like, let's say AI is based off of historical images, so let's draw a line in the sand in the year 2023. And we're only referring to stuff that happened before that point. In the year 2050, like, what are we going to be referring to? And is it the AI derivative work that happened in 2040 or whatever? It's
But that's
interesting.
also making an assumption here, which is that future AI looks like current AI. So current AI, we
exactly.
assume is not creative, it's just regurgitating. But in the future, it's quite possible that AI could be more creative than we are, and we would go, oh my God, that is incredible, we've never seen anything like it before. And perhaps audiences would learn to recognize that and go, actually, it's just done by a
But
computer.
we've then got a history of made images rather than reality, which is what we've got now.
So one of the things that comes up regularly in conversations about AI and machine learning is the birth of photography and how photography definitively killed fine art. It's dead. It's no more because there's cameras and we can now take pictures of things. We no longer need representative art, figurative art. And of course, what happened was an explosion in abstract art, basically people looking beyond the image into the emotion, into how to portray human existence. And the argument is, well, that only happened because people were freed up to do that. Something else was now doing very, very accurate figurative representations of people. So we don't need to do that anymore. And so the question that comes up here, going back to what Kay was saying, is do we end up in a more sort of craft-oriented, deliberate, like, does that actually become more interesting now for people?
It's actually going the other way, isn't it?
Yeah.
Sort of going back to the land, so to speak, as we said. Sort of, is there a point where
Natural wines.
Yeah.
This whole thing was just a big plot to have dinners together, by the way. I don't know if I'm blowing anything by saying that.
Well, we did used to have a joke that D3 stood for dinner, dinner, dinner.
Accurate.
So, but how would that play out? I mean, we know there's not more money necessarily, but this came up. It's the idea. Declining budgets are a problem, and there's an entire political argument here that could go on for ages. But if you have time, often you don't need as much money. You can figure out what the resources are, what the tools that are available, what are the cheap materials, how can you use lower cost projectors, to basically create a look. When you're rushed in a weird way, you need more money because you don't have the time for thought and deliberation and iteration. You're just thrown into it, and you have, we did a show in 5 weeks that involved a pair of robots and a bunch of 1 mil LED screens. I wish we could have thrown more money at that, but it honestly wouldn't have helped because there was nobody working who welded aluminum anymore because it's the middle of the pandemic and they all got laid off and got jobs in the automotive industry. But is that something that frees up? Are we able to do more interesting things for theater and various other things because the tools are cheaper and more accessible?
I think there's definitely something, isn't there, about that sort of having time to plan, having time to think about efficiency and ways of being more efficient with those. I think you're absolutely right. When you're sort of rushed, I don't think anything. I think as Luke said, I don't think anything's good has come out of doing something super quick. We've all been in that position, and I'm sure we've sort of held the sort of seat of our pants to doing the absolute utmost best as we can by burning ourselves out to do it. But when you think back, there's probably loads of things you learned and just thought, if we do this again, there's ways. So I think by just being sort of slower and more considered does allow you to sort of go. We're doing a project at the moment where the budget isn't. It's pretty terrible, and we've just sort of gone into mode of what ways of mark making are there out there that we can use? What's the really exciting things? And actually, what's happened is we've sort of come back to using a lot more sort of experimental things, just some really sort of weird things, like I was telling you last night about the old apps on the phone. And, just really exciting ways of doing things. And I think sometimes, it's too easy to sort of just step into the same path of delivering. So I think when you're challenged, when you've got those constraints, I think actually they can sometimes be a really good thing.
Yeah, it really depends, doesn't it? Like the first talk yesterday talking about the VJ thing that had to be on a floppy disk because it's the only way you could actually store it is like, this is the box you have to create in, and so make the solution. I don't know if anyone's watched it or highly recommend on Disney Plus. I think it is the ILM documentary called Light and Magic is super inspiring. If you're in this industry, you should definitely watch it. But the idea of like, it mirrors our industry. It's more on the film side, but of like starting with models and then, we need some sort of way to control this. Let's build a motion control system, I guess. Like just, this is what motion control is. Okay, next. Okay, now do this. As more tools get into play, it only sort of opens up more possibilities. And it's like what we always speak about with networking and rendering, and Luke with his render bar and everyone else talking about real-time content is like, well, if you render something faster, I'm just going to make something bigger and more detailed and more this and this and this. You make the pipe bigger, we will fill it in this industry, especially from a design perspective. So I think as new tools come out and looking into the future for this, how do you manage that growth and still make something that's interesting? And I think that's going to be the real challenge for it is you're going to have to manually force yourself to take that step back. Because like with real-time rendering, we were talking about this in Laura's work in this space and talking about it as well has been very similar of when you look at something rendering in real time, you can iterate. Same with with generative AI, you can all of a sudden like squirrel yourself down over here and realize we're starting over here, and you have to sometimes step away.
I think it's that sort of old saying, isn't it, that just because you can do it doesn't mean it's right.
Yeah.
Well, and the ability to do something quickly means that you get to make a lot of mistakes more quickly, but you can also vastly pull yourself away from the through line that you were because of a design brief or something else you were trying to do, and you can basically wander off. It's like any Google search. You click one link, and then 3 hours later you're like reading the 17th Wikipedia article on something, and because you can click from thing to thing to thing, and now you're into some tiny detailed part of it. But
on a positive side, though, I guess I feel like I'm being negative about it. Like, and an interesting side about that sort of speed and these advancements is taking an example from what we've talked about this week and what other people are relating to now, like virtual production and tracked camera work. I talked about it with another talk recently, but Ash and I were on Katy Perry's Super Bowl, and it was all projected from one perspective, and it was like, 150 million people are going to see something very interesting, but all these people in the back are going to see complete garbage. Sorry, for those people, but it was the idea of being on a camera track. We went down a weird path for a couple of days of like, well, what if we pre-planned the cameras and cut and pre-rendered these different angles?
We actually tried to do a notch version of that for an LDR.
Yeah,
thing.
exactly.
It completely failed because we don't have any time.
It was horrific, yeah.
But
at that time, we wanted to do something, but it just physically wasn't there because of speed. And Octane had just came out, so you could render things fast, but it wasn't fast enough. So now that things are faster, we're able to do things that we just didn't think were possible. Yeah. So as we look towards, for me, and I think a lot of us, our attention is on wearables in the next year, the next 2 years, next 3 years, is like, if we're all sitting here and there's my prompts are on the side of my eyes, so I can know what's actually going on, like that will start to change things, and that happens because of that speed and because of the processing is faster and just opening up new doors.
But I think you summed up there as sort of positive, because it's about having, you had the idea and it just wasn't there. The ability wasn't there, whereas the other way around. At least you had it's not like the ability's there, so you go, I can. Do you know what I mean? It's so that's what's nice about it. Yeah. It still was solidly a great idea that just wasn't able to be realised, which is actually brilliant.
Yeah. So we're winding down to our final seconds, and it is about the future. So I'm just going to throw out something which came up as a result of this, which is one of the things I imagine happening is that I could do this where I had almost no notes, and this has all been extemporaneous. And that in the background, based on purely what we're saying, we could have a contextual PowerPoint keynote thing that would have been generated in real time, adding context and depth to what we're saying. That seems totally plausible. And I'll just plant that flag in the ground. There's your prediction. No. Any other?
I mean, the thing that I'm sort of most excited about is, when all of the stuff that we do now came out of making shows and making your tools while you made the show, until today you need a computer programmer to be able to do that on your team. But they're few and far between, and most of them work for Google. And and I think the thing that really excites me about AI is, I'm going to jump to a slide here. The ability of AI to help non-programmers write code, and that does really serious things. So you don't need a computer programmer to make something like D3 or make something like Notch. Because that then gives you the ability to make your own tools and make something completely unique that not everybody else can do. And I think this is in the next 5 years is going to be pretty commonplace.
So tools that evolve out of your point of view.
Tools that you mold, that you create yourself. I think that when David did his talk and they produced that VR, that visualizer. Mm-hmm. Imagine being able to do that in an afternoon by talking to a computer rather than hiring somebody, and that's really powerful, and that's coming.
Do you have any?
I don't think it's. I think it's sort of less of a prediction and more of a hope. Not a positive note. I just. I think the hope is that all of these wonderful things that are coming about will actually, be put to a really good use for the best of mankind and the world we seem to be quietly finishing off. So no, I just really, I hope that they can be used in the power that they are to do good.
Yeah. I mean, this was predictions and not sort of Pixar movie plots, but but
Nickelback will still be touring.
I really appreciate that, though. I want that to happen too.
Yeah. You mentioned that there's a studio in LA called Orbital Studios, and AJ Wedding is the owner there, and I was visiting. It's a virtual production studio, one of the 10,000 studios that exist, it seems like. But there's a program he's a part of that's about looking at your carbon footprint in every piece of anything you put in the space, whether it's plywood or drywall or whatever. It's barcoded and scanned, and then he's part of a group that it emails you and updates you every month, and it analyzes when the next time that you can do something more efficient or how much time is spent, and it's using, it's not totally AI, but it's assisting tools to help you monitor something towards a better future, and planting that now will help them out 10 years from now in a way that I'm going to have to go and is this plywood okay? It's a really good thing. So hopefully there's good things like that.
Exactly.
For me, I don't know. I mean, I think AI is a big thing, and we keep talking about it, and I hope that it's like you say, like a more helpful Clippy than not, like actually being able to act on something and help you, which is good.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of 50-50 skeptical. Yeah. Having AI write code is one thing, but actually debugging code and figuring out what the hell you did wrong is possibly a little bit tougher.
But even just giving you the what was that one phrase again, blah, 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 or even when they did, what was it, processing, Matt's software or whatever, that does I want to make a circle, and it just makes a circle, that helps people generate art. But for me, AI is a big part of it. I think the other part of, like I was saying, wearable is really hopefully interesting, and I think hoping that some sort of tactile relationship will be really helpful for all this in the future. And I think that some people are working on some interesting stuff for that, but I think it's quite a ways off. But connecting people remotely over the cloud, over remote connectivity, and having them have shared experiences, I think is the only way that our very physical world of entertainment grows and changes into that metaverse stuff. But that there are innovations needed to really make that successful, I think. So I'm interested in that path quite a bit.
Cool. Well, I think we're good for questions. If anybody.
Any predictions you feel were missed?
Yeah. No.
We didn't talk about VR. We didn't talk about the metaverse. We didn't talk about any of the current stuff. We didn't talk about crypto. We didn't talk about crypto.
We didn't talk about crypto.
Which is probably a good thing.
We didn't talk about lace.
We didn't talk about lace. We have to smash the mills. I'd like everybody to join me after this.
First the pub.
First the pub, then smash
the
the mills.
Then the
It's
mills.
better when you're drunk.
Any predictions?
Anything we missed?
I mean, I'm genuinely curious because predicting things seems we are as a species, so bad at this. And it's one of the interesting things about this task is looking back at the things that we wouldn't have predicted. I mean, LED replacing scenery seems really, really obvious now. And we sort of believed it. And I started a company called Element Labs with a few people. We believed in digital scenery. But like, the scale that things are at now is sort of insane. You know, and it's like if you're a carpenter on a show, your job has changed because most of the sets on these tours, you know, aren't like there's not a lot of flats going out on big award shows and tours, and occasionally you have a designer who plays against that, but for the most part, it's a whole lot of video.
I think that's what's interesting, though, is like seeing the good in that as well. Like going back to that ILM documentary, there's a beautiful moment where they're talking to the models team, these people making the the little tiny things, and like you see that model shop getting smaller and smaller and smaller. But some of those people transitioned into the 3D side.
Yeah.
And I think Phil and Zach from Lux talk about this a lot. Is that their job in virtual production now is not to say, hey, old DP and gaffer, like, get out of here. It's like, hey, how do you use this tool that we built? And you give them the tool, and if it's the right mentality, a lot of times they do something with it that we would never do because they have 40 years of experience or whatever. So they actually know how to light things and what aesthetics are and stuff like that. So I think the hope is with some of that is that it use those new tools to teach all generations to make it go. It's like the horseless carriage, thing. Like cars change the world in good and bad ways, but
Cars change the world, but commuting times are constant. So basically, everybody travels about the same amount today, or amount of time. The distance has just increased. I think we have
Not in London.
I have a question from the live stream. As AI evolves and we hybridize a new type of production workflow where the possibilities for advanced tools and the shows are being built together in parallel, what other interesting possibilities / mediums does everyone foresee beyond XR, AR, wearables, etc.? Perhaps a bit far off, but thinking, for example, Neuralink, BCIs, etc.
I think a big one we haven't talked about is light field displays.
We haven't talked about light field displays.
Which I think is actually going to be a thing before VR is before
Which-
VR
which-
everywhere.
which-
I don't think you're not going to see a stadium full of people with headsets on. I think you'll see light field displays in a stadium before that.
True. I think for what's going to go on with AIs and various other things, I think you are going to see more, digital humans. There was a group of ex-Silicon Graphics people who were pushing this whole idea of vectors.
Have you seen the ABBA show?
Yeah, yes, but this was in the 1990s, and basically rigging like digital characters. I think it was vectors.
I love it. I hope it's
Yeah.
vectors. Yeah.
You would have to, Rhea Fisher, who's now at Netflix, was part of that. But you'd have to ask that group, and so I think things like that. It's a great example of how people were trying that years and years ago, and now you have fully rigged digital humans.
I mean, that's happening in a very. I want to talk about digital humans in a second. I have feelings, but in the very practical way of virtual actors is that dubbing now. So much of it's happening from an AI generated voice creation. I don't know if everyone's looked into this, but not only from a type in the script or listen to the audio and change it from English to Belgian or whatever, but then also changing the actual lips and in the shot, recreating digitally the lips. And all of a sudden, I saw this, and I have a friend, a partner who owns a dubbing company. I called him, are you okay? It's really interesting. They're having lots of problems with it. It's going to take a long time to develop. Sometimes it's completely wrong, but it's it's really here.
Or Luke Hall's example where they couldn't do the West Side Story thing again because they'd had to reshoot all that footage with the new actors. With things like deep fakes, we could solve that problem. We could just go re-render with the new faces.
It's not wrong.
Yeah. Or what about remaking The Crown with the actual
There's a
historical figures?
Yes.
Deep faked.
there's a royalties issue.
I mean, I think, but the digital humans thing, I've spent a lot of time during COVID talking with people about virtual things versus real things, and all this XR and AR stuff is a huge part of it. But when we started doing, the interesting thing about doing XR with Disguise was that it was putting a real person into a virtual space. And I think there's a lot of value of like having real humans there. There's another path that people have gone, which is virtual people in virtual space. And I think there's some time still to figure out what that looks like and what that feels like. I mean, look at like The Irishman and Netflix, like millions and millions of dollars to watch a very young, you know, De Niro on screen.
That was weird, wasn't it?
And you feel very strange watching.
was.
But it wasn't very well
Yeah.
done.
No.
But I mean, but how does it get better done than that? You know, like those are the best people. in
Well,
the
somebody
world,
actually
but-
did, I think, do, you know, here's what it should have looked like on Reddit. or
Yeah, a
something.
year later
It's-
using actual
yeah.
deepfake. But I just,
No,
I
but
think
it was years, I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
they were working on that years
Yeah.
ahead of the technology that was available when the time they shipped it, so it's.
But I do think, I don't want to say like, you know, the uncanny valley is a long debate that has, maybe we passed it in some ways and not in other ways, but there's a path there for sure, and digital humans are going to be a
I mean, one
part
of the
it.
things about the Uncanny Valley was that it actually doesn't prevent. I mean, I don't know if you've seen the ABBA show, but it was like going to, it's something out of Black Mirror, because it was deeply in the Uncanny Valley, but there were 3,000 people losing their shit. They did not care.
Doesn't
I was
matter.
standing there, sort of just looking at it. My mother was next to me, like with tears streaming down her face. I was like, "What is going on?" But it does. You know, even though it was very clearly sort of Uncanny Valley, it worked.
It
You know,
was,
people
yeah.
people
No.
accepted it.
And this is it, like what is the use case of it versus like complete replacement of human
Yeah.
beings?
But I think getting back to the question, just, and also attempting to wrap up, although we'll probably just stand up here and keep
Well, we're just
talking.
going to move to the pub,
Yeah.
basically.
We started it
But,
before.
but
before we got
it's
going.
like the idea of, like, you have sensor fusion, you have this AI, you have digital models of spaces, and what we get into is this sort of continuum of synthetic environments, where it's not the ABBA show, it's always with you. There's always artifacts of this and elements of this in spaces. And you're going to have this digital element and this real world element that's just constantly, that's a persistent thing. And people have had names for this for ages: physical computing, you know, it's or spatial computing, and that's just going to become just background noise. It's just going to be normal, for good or for ill. But I think we do need to wrap up unless somebody has one question.
No, there's another fire drill.
Oh, another fire
We
drill.
have another question, I think.
Do we have an actual?
Small question. Well, it's not very small. So with AI,
We should get you on the mic.
Yeah, let's get you on the mic.
Yeah.
We can all have some water.
And then we're
And then we'll
gonna wrap up.
okay, so the question was, this is working, right? Yeah. With AI now taking, or going in the direction of taking the technical, as in, you know, the creation of code, for instance, and also the artistic potentially with, you know, stable diffusion and the more advanced methods, which is more likely? Socialist techno-utopia powered by AI, or a dystopian Blade Runner-like future? Where are we heading? What do you guys think?
Well, both at the same time,
Yeah, I
clearly.
was gonna say.
Yeah, it depends on what
Simultaneously
country
going
you
that
live
way.
in.
Fully automated luxury communism.
Fully automated luxury communism is what we would like, please.
Yeah.
I think. But no, I mean, there's an argument for that, and there's an argument that it's not going to be one or the other. It's going to be bits of both, and that's just, you know, we all get a little bit of dystopia.
Well, I mean, it's probably going to be famine before that.
Yes, and there's the famine and the
The collapse of the insect
Anyway,
population.
we've
Cheerful stuff.
successfully avoided much of this topic, and I'd like to at least have a beer in my hand before we continue. So, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you for coming to this event.